They said hunger humbles a person. They said desperation makes you quiet. But that night, it made her infamous. In the middle of a crowded store, under the glare of fluorescent lights, Taylor clutched a simple plastic bag. Inside it was nothing more than a packet of milk. Her hands trembled as security yanked it away. People pointed. Mothers pulled their children closer. Someone muttered the word thief. Her wedding ring still glimmered faintly, though the man who placed it there had already abandoned her. Her dress, creased and faded, looked nothing like the gown she once walked down the aisle in. And now, in front of strangers, she was dragged outside, accused, disgraced, discarded like the milk she tried to take. But as the doors swung open and she fell to the pavement, something happened that no one expected. A sleek black car pulled up. The engine purred, and the door opened slowly. Out stepped a man in a tailored suit. His shoes clicked against the concrete as if each step carried weight, authority, danger. He did not look at the crowd. He did not look at the cashier. He looked only at her. And in that moment, humiliation turned into something else, something no one there could understand, something she would never forget. Before I tell you how one stranger turned her downfall into the beginning of her empire, subscribe now. If you don't, imagine living your worst moment with the whole world watching, and no one stepping in to defend you. Comment your city below, and let me see who dares to be seen, and who hides in silence. Taylor had once been a bride with promises whispered into her ear. A wedding dress, a smiling husband, a life she believed would be filled with light. Her name was Taylor. She wasn't wealthy, but she was determined, and she worked hard. When she first met Liam, her heart betrayed her common sense. He was charming, confident, and full of stories about a future that sounded larger than life. He told her she deserved more. He told her he would provide it. And she believed him. Their wedding had been a fairy tale. Guests marveled at their vows. Photographers captured her smile. For a moment it felt real. For a moment she thought her life had shifted forever. But fairy tales are fragile. They do not withstand real storms. And Taylor's fairy tale ended faster than she could ever imagine. For within weeks the promises that had carried her into marriage began to crack. Liam grew distant. His temper rose. The man who once called her his everything now treated her as if she were invisible. Her savings dwindled. Her friends vanished, unable to bear the constant tension in her home. And then he left, without a warning, without money, without care. He left her with nothing but bills, shadows, and a hunger so heavy she could barely breathe. Which is why, on that night in the grocery store, a bride was reduced to a beggar, stealing milk to keep herself alive. But humiliation doesn't always destroy. Sometimes it plants the first seed of vengeance. The man who stepped out of that black car had a presence that silenced the crowd. His name was Alexander Ward, a man whispered about in boardrooms, a man feared in negotiations. His wealth wasn't just money, it was command. He looked down at Taylor, her knees scraped, her cheeks wet with tears. And then, without speaking a word, he took the milk bag from the cashier's hand and paid for it in silence. The crowd went quiet. No one dared to argue. With one motion of his hand, Alexander dismissed them, and suddenly their judgment meant nothing. He turned to Taylor and said only this, "Get in the car." Shaking, she did. Inside, the leather smelled foreign, rich, almost suffocating. She sat in silence, clutching the bag of milk like it was a crown jewel. Minutes passed before he finally spoke. His voice was low, calm, deliberate. "Do you want pity, or do you want a way out?" Her lips parted, but no words came. She only nodded. And that was when Taylor's story stopped being one of disgrace and became one of power. The drive was silent. The city lights bled past the tinted windows, and the hum of the engine was the only sound Taylor could hear. Her fingers still clenched the small bag of milk, as if letting it go would mean losing the last thread of her dignity. Finally, Alexander spoke. "I don't rescue people," he said, eyes fixed on the road ahead. "I invest in them, but I only invest in those who can survive the worst. Tell me, are you worth the risk?" Taylor turned to him, her throat dry. She had no money, no family, no future. All she had left was her will, and it was burning hotter than ever. "Yes," she whispered. A faint smile flickered across his face. He reached into his coat pocket and slid a sleek black card onto the seat between them. "Tomorrow, 9 o'clock, my office. Use that to get past security. Be late, and you'll never see me again." The car pulled up outside a crumbling apartment block, the place she now called home. As she stepped out, he added one final sentence. "You get one chance. Don't waste it." The car door shut, and the sound of the engine faded into the night. Taylor stood frozen, clutching the card. For the first time since her husband's betrayal, she felt something stirring inside her, not hope, not safety, but the spark of a fight. That night she couldn't sleep. The words replayed over and over, one chance. It wasn't mercy he offered, it wasn't kindness, it was a test. The next morning she walked into Alexander Ward's headquarters, towering glass walls, a lobby lined with marble, eyes turning as soon as she entered. Whispers followed her. Her dress was simple, worn, out of place among tailored suits and polished heels, yet she walked forward, holding the black card like a shield. At the top floor, Alexander waited. Papers sprawled across his desk, phone pressed to his ear. He didn't greet her. He didn't even look up. When he finally ended his call, he leaned back and studied her. "You're late." Her heart sank. She checked the clock. It was exactly 9. He smirked. "Lesson 1. When you arrive on time, you're already behind. Sit." Taylor obeyed. He slid a folder across the desk. Inside were tasks, research reports, contacts, financial briefs, work designed to drown her, to break her spirit. He watched her scan the pages, then said, "If you can handle this by Friday, you stay. If not, you disappear." She met his gaze. "And if I succeed?" His lips curved into a dangerous half-smile. "Then you'll never beg for milk again." Taylor left that office with trembling hands and a folder heavier than stone. Every word, every number inside it was foreign, designed to confuse, to crush. But as she sat in her apartment that night, surrounded by flickering light and silence, she whispered to herself, "I've survived worse. I can survive this too." She worked until dawn. She worked until her fingers ached, until her eyes burned. Every page she conquered, every note she scribbled, she felt the fire inside her grow stronger. When Friday arrived, she walked back into his office. The same folder lay on his desk, untouched. He gestured for her to place her work down. Without a word, he opened it, scanning page after page. The silence stretched like a noose. Then finally, he shut the folder and looked up. "You're still here," he said. "Interesting." For Alexander, it was amusement. For Taylor, it was survival. But neither of them realized that this single test had set something unstoppable in motion. He thought he was shaping her. He thought he was in control. But the truth? She was already sharpening her mind, her will, her hunger, into a weapon. Think you'd recognize danger wrapped as opportunity. Most people wouldn't. They'd walk away, too afraid to fight through it. Subscribe right now and comment your city. If you don't, ask yourself this. When the one chance to change your life comes, will you even see it? Or will you let it vanish forever? Alexander's world was not a place for the weak. It was a tower of glass and steel where whispers carried power and mistakes were punishable not by correction, but by exile. Taylor walked those halls like a shadow. Suits swept past her, eyes flicking, judging, dismissing her before she could even speak. To them, she was nothing more than a stray pulled in off the street, a charity case destined to fail. But Taylor did not come to be pitied. She came to survive. Day after day, Alexander threw obstacles in her path. Impossible deadlines, calculations meant to confuse, reports designed to bury her in failure. He would assign 10 hours of work and demand it in 3. He would drop names of clients she'd never heard of and expect her to know every detail of their empires by morning. And when she staggered under the weight of it all, he never offered help, never a word of encouragement. Only that cold stare, as though he were watching a fire consume her, waiting to see if she would burn or emerge hardened. There were nights when exhaustion pinned her to the floor of her apartment. Pages scattered around her, ink smudged across her fingers. Hunger gnawed at her stomach, but she ignored it. Her tears fell onto the very documents she was studying. She whispered to herself, over and over, "If I give up now, I'll always be the thief they said I was." By dawn, she would rise, dress in her plain clothes, and walk back into that tower. Each step into that building was a battle cry only she could hear. One evening, Alexander summoned her. His office glowed in the city's skyline, shadows stretching across the polished floor. He leaned back in his chair, hands folded, eyes fixed on her with that unblinking calm. "You're still here," he said flatly. "Most would have run." Taylor's chest rose and fell, her body screaming for rest, but her voice was steady. "Most don't know what it's like to be stripped of everything. I do. And when you've already lost it all, nothing can break you." For the first time, something flickered across his face. Amusement, respect, or calculation. She couldn't tell. He stood, walked past her, and stopped by the window. The city sprawled below like a kingdom at his feet. Without turning, he said, "You'll stay, but know this. Every step higher you climb, the fall becomes deadlier, and I don't catch people when they fall." His words should have scared her. They should have forced her into submission. Instead, they etched themselves into her bones. She left that night with a strange certainty. She wasn't there just to survive his tests. She was there to learn his game, and once she learned it, she would play it better than him. Success never goes unnoticed. And in Alexander's empire, attention was both a weapon and a curse. As Taylor's presence in the company grew, whispers turned sharper. Meetings where she had once been invisible now ended with eyes following her. Clients remembered her name. Assistants who once ignored her now stepped aside when she walked past. And that did not go unnoticed by one woman, Candace. She had the look of someone born into privilege. Flawless gowns, heels that clicked like gavel strikes, lips that never smiled unless there was mockery hidden beneath. To the world, she was Alexander Ward's fiancée, polished, untouchable, secure. But behind her practiced elegance, her eyes carried something venomous, fear that her crown was slipping. The first encounter came like a storm. Taylor was in the boardroom, gathering files after a long meeting. Candace entered without a word, heels echoing against marble. She didn't look at Taylor at first, only at her reflection in the tall glass windows, adjusting an earring, smoothing her hair. When she finally spoke, her tone dripped with contempt. "So, you're the little project he picked up from the gutter." Taylor froze, papers clutched against her chest. Candace turned, eyes narrowing. "Do you know what they call you? The milk thief bride. A woman tossed aside by her husband, caught stealing scraps, now clinging to Alexander like a stray dog." The words sliced deep, sharper than any insult she'd faced in the streets. But Taylor didn't flinch. She didn't let Candace see the wound. She lifted her chin and whispered, "Then I suppose even strays can survive things that would kill the pampered." Candace's lips curled, but there was a flicker of unease in her eyes. She stepped closer, lowering her voice. "You don't belong here, and I will make sure Alexander remembers it." With that, she turned and walked away, perfume lingering like poison in the air. That night, Taylor sat alone in her apartment, replaying the confrontation in her mind. Every word Candace spoke was meant to reduce her to nothing, but instead of breaking her, it hardened her resolve. Candace believed she held power through beauty, through status, through her connection to Alexander. But Taylor knew better. Power was never in the ring on your finger. Power was in knowledge, in endurance, in silence while you built your strike. The next morning, Taylor walked into work with the same calm expression as always. She smiled when she passed Candace in the hall, a smile that revealed nothing but promised everything. She would not fight Candace with words. She would not fight her with insults. She would fight her with patience. And when the time came, she would not just dethrone her, she would erase her completely. Candace believed she was untouchable, but Taylor had learned something in her fire of humiliation. The ones who believe they are secure are often the easiest to unseat. And so while Candace obsessed over appearances, Taylor turned her eyes elsewhere, into the hidden veins of Alexander's empire. Late nights in the office, when the city lights glimmered against the glass, she studied the documents others ignored. She read contracts line by line, traced signatures, followed numbers that didn't quite add up. She noticed the cracks, the debts masked as profits, the partnerships stitched together with fragile trust, the offshore accounts shielded by layers of names. Where others saw power, she saw weakness. Where others saw permanence, she saw opportunity. Slowly, she began to map it all. A secret blueprint of Alexander's kingdom, every connection, every liability, every trap that could one day turn against him. But Taylor wasn't reckless. She didn't act in haste. She moved with precision. She met quietly with lawyers, always under the guise of errands. She consulted an accountant, careful never to reveal her full intentions. She opened small accounts of her own, invisible at first, hidden in shadows. Each move was a chess piece placed, small, unnoticed. But one day, they would surround the king. At work, Alexander tested her relentlessly. He handed her mergers to review, expecting her to miss details. She did not. He tossed her figures meant to confuse, but she returned them sharper than before. She watched him carefully, the way he signed papers without reading when distracted, the way he trusted the wrong assistants with sensitive information, the way his confidence made him blind. And she thought to herself, every empire can be stolen, especially by the one holding the pen closest to the throne. Meanwhile, she kept her mask intact, smiling at meetings, carrying out her duties with diligence, acting grateful, loyal, harmless, the perfect apprentice. But at night, in her solitude, she whispered truths into the air. He thinks he's molding me into something he can control, but all the while, I am learning how to dismantle him piece by piece. And so her hunger shifted, no longer just for survival, no longer just to escape her humiliation. Now, her hunger was for power itself. By day, Taylor was everything Alexander wanted her to be, polished, efficient, quietly obedient. She smiled when spoken to, offered answers when asked, and never revealed how much she truly knew. Colleagues envied her position, so close to the man they all feared, the man they all wanted to impress. But Taylor never let her envy show. She let them whisper, let them talk behind her back, let them believe she was nothing more than a girl grateful for opportunity. That was the mask. Because beneath the mask, something else was alive. Every word spoken in the office, every careless conversation left open in corridors, she memorized. Every subtle shift in Alexander's tone, she catalogued. His vulnerabilities were no longer mysteries, they were clues, and she collected them like weapons. When Alexander laughed at her silence, she laughed too. When he scolded her for mistakes she didn't make, she bowed her head, apologizing as though she deserved the blame. To him she looked like clay, obedient, moldable, soft. But only Taylor knew that her silence was not weakness. It was strategy. And Alexander, blinded by his arrogance, never suspected. The dinners with investors continued. Taylor stood just behind him, pouring wine, refilling glasses, taking notes when asked. Candace flaunted her jewelry, her gowns, her rehearsed elegance. But Taylor noticed how the investors looked longer at her than at the so-called queen. They noticed her composure, her calm intelligence, the way she could summarize an hour of talk in a single sentence. Candace noticed, too. The jealousy grew. Her smile tightened whenever Taylor spoke. Her eyes narrowed with every subtle nod of approval Taylor received from Alexander, and Taylor understood something critical. She no longer had to steal attention. It came to her naturally. One evening, after a particularly tense dinner, Candace confronted Alexander in their gilded parlor. "She undermines me," Candace hissed. "Every time she opens her mouth, she makes me look like a fool." Alexander poured himself a drink, swirling the glass lazily. "She's a girl from nothing," he replied. "She couldn't touch you even if she tried." But Taylor, standing silently in the hallway, heard every word, and she smiled to herself. Because the moment a rival is dismissed, the moment they're underestimated, that's when they're most dangerous. So Taylor wore her mask tighter. She made herself smaller when she needed to. She let Candace believe she was winning, let Alexander believe she was harmless. But inside, she was sharpening the edges of her plan. The mask kept her safe. The mask earned her trust. The mask gave her time. And with time, she knew. The empire would eventually bow not to Alexander, not to Candace, but to her. Right now, someone around you is wearing a mask. They're smiling in your face while plotting behind your back. Don't be so confident that you're untouchable. Subscribe and comment below who you trust least, because the one you ignore might be the one holding your downfall. It started with small moves, invisible ones, the kind no one noticed until it was too late. Taylor began to rearrange the details of Alexander's empire, tiny shifts that appeared like efficiency, but in truth, they were calculated steps of control. The investors' schedules? She managed them. The legal documents? She streamlined them. The passwords to certain accounts? She was the one resetting them, always under the guise of helping Alexander with his workload. But in reality, she was weaving a net, strand by strand. And once a net is complete, the prey doesn't even realize it's trapped until it's already too late to escape. Candace, meanwhile, grew more reckless. Her jealousy burned hotter with every meeting, every dinner, every whispered compliment that Taylor received. She began making mistakes, public ones. She interrupted Alexander in front of guests. She spoke without facts. She exaggerated, only to be corrected by Taylor's calm, measured voice. And every time it happened, Alexander's jaw tightened. He said nothing, but his silence spoke louder than any rebuke. Taylor watched it all. She didn't push. She didn't gloat. She didn't have to. She simply let Candace destroy herself piece by piece, while Taylor built a quiet empire beneath their very feet. One night, when Alexander was away on business, Taylor made her boldest move yet. She stayed late at the office, the building empty except for her reflection in the glass walls. She opened the master file, a vault of contracts, deeds, and confidential agreements. With a few keystrokes, she created a mirror system, a shadow archive. Every critical document, every binding signature, every asset, copied, stored, and placed under her silent control. If Alexander ever turned on her, if Candace ever tried to strike, Taylor now held a weapon that could fracture their empire in a single day. The trap was no longer forming. It was complete. But a trap is worthless without bait. And so Taylor crafted her next step with precision. She intentionally let a minor mistake slip through, something so small that only Candace would notice. A misfiled date, a missing page. To anyone else, it was nothing. To Candace, desperate for ammunition, it was everything. Candace seized it. She stormed into Alexander's office the next morning, waving the evidence of Taylor's incompetence. Her voice shook with fury, her words venomous. Alexander frowned, his patience worn thin. "That's it? A date?" he muttered, dismissing her accusation with a wave of his hand. Candace's face went pale. She had been baited, and Taylor stood in the corner, silent, calm, almost invisible, the perfect servant. But inside, She knew the trap had closed, because Candace was no longer Alexander's queen. She was the jealous wife making baseless claims. And Taylor? She had become the indispensable one, the woman Alexander defended, the woman whose presence he now considered vital. The empire was shifting. The throne was tilting. And soon it would fall into Taylor's waiting hands. Candace didn't realize it yet, but her war was already lost. Every outburst she made, every accusation she screamed, every desperate attempt to expose Taylor only tightened the noose around her own neck, because Alexander, proud, calculating, always focused on results, saw chaos as weakness. And Candace, in her fury, had become the very image of chaos. The meetings where she tried to humiliate Taylor, they backfired. Investors left shaking their heads, whispering among themselves that Alexander's wife was becoming unhinged. The staff, once loyal to her, now avoided her like a storm they didn't want to get caught in. Meanwhile, Taylor rose higher without even lifting a finger. She didn't argue. She didn't retaliate. She let Candace destroy herself in public while she kept building power in private. And Alexander? He began relying on Taylor in ways he never imagined. Late-night calls for advice, trusting her with decisions Candace should have been part of. Slowly, subtly, Taylor replaced the wife's voice with her own. Candace could feel it slipping. The throne she once commanded, the respect she once demanded. And panic has a way of making even the strongest people reckless. So she made her fatal mistake. One evening, in a rage, Candace stormed into the office with a plan to expose Taylor once and for all. She had spent weeks collecting evidence, snippets of misplaced files, whispers from staff, anything she could twist into proof of betrayal. She barged into Alexander's private study, her hands shaking, her words sharp. "She's stealing from you. Can't you see it? She's playing you for a fool." Alexander stared at her, not with shock, not with belief, but with a heavy, exhausted disappointment, the kind that cuts deeper than anger. "Candace," he said slowly, "this obsession of yours is destroying us." The words silenced the room. It was over. Candace's heart sank as she realized the trap Taylor set had worked, perfectly. Every move, every word had driven her straight into it, and now she stood there, looking like a paranoid woman who couldn't handle the shadow of another. Taylor stood quietly behind Alexander, her eyes lowered in humility. But inside she knew the crown had slipped. The empire was hers to claim. And Candace? She was no longer the queen. She was the liability. The downfall had begun, and there was no way back. Have you ever seen someone destroy themselves by fighting too hard? Candace thought she was protecting her place, but every move she made only pushed her closer to ruin. Tell me in the comments, do you think Taylor planned it this perfectly, or was it all Candace's fault? And don't forget, subscribe, because what happens next is the final blow that no one saw coming. Candace had been queen for so long that she never once imagined what life would feel like without the crown. But that moment had arrived. Her breakdown in Alexander's study wasn't just a fight. It was the last straw, and Taylor knew it. The very next morning, Alexander called a private meeting. Not in the boardroom where Candace once commanded attention. Not in their mansion where she once reigned as hostess. No, this time it was in a small, sterile conference room, far from the grandeur Candace was used to. A place stripped of status, stripped of memory. Candace arrived dressed in her finest gown, still trying to hold on to the image of power. Taylor came in quietly, in a simple dark dress, calm and composed, and then Alexander entered, carrying a folder that would end it all. His voice was cold, almost mechanical. "Candace," he said, "for the good of the company, and for the good of my sanity, I can't have this war continue." She blinked, confused, still clinging to hope. "You're asking me to step aside?" she asked. But he didn't ask. He told. "You're no longer part of the board, effective immediately." The room fell silent. Candace gasped. her hand clutching the folder as if by holding it she could change what it contained. But the documents were clear. Her shares had been shifted, her power revoked, and standing silently in the corner, Taylor knew this was her victory. Candace's voice cracked, desperate. "You can't do this to me. After everything, I built this life with you." But Alexander's eyes didn't soften. His loyalty had already shifted. Taylor didn't need to gloat. She didn't need to raise her voice. All she did was step forward, gently place her hand on Alexander's shoulder, and say softly, "It's for the best." And just like that, Candace understood. She wasn't just being pushed aside. She was being replaced. Her empire, her marriage, her identity, handed to the very woman she tried to destroy. Candace stumbled out of that room, the heels she once wore with pride now clicking like a funeral march against the cold floor. Every eye that had once admired her now avoided her. Every whisper in the hallway cut like a knife. And Taylor? She walked out standing taller than ever, not as a victim, not as a guest, but as the new queen. Candace had fought, screamed, and clawed to hold her throne, but in the end, her downfall came in silence. Because the final blow was not an explosion, it was a replacement. Candace left the building that morning with nothing but her pride, and even that was crumbling. The mansion she once ruled was gone. The staff no longer answered her calls. Her name, once respected in society, had become a cautionary whisper. The same people who once bowed at her presence now avoided her eyes in public. And the worst part? She had no one to blame but herself. Her phone buzzed that night, messages, but not of comfort. Screenshots of tabloids filled her inbox. Headlines screamed the truth she refused to face. Candace ousted, younger woman now at the helm. From queen to exile, how greed ended her reign. Each word was a dagger. She tried calling Alexander, desperate for some shred of hope. He didn't pick up. Taylor had already silenced her voice in his life, and so, alone in a small apartment she never imagined living in, Candace sat in the dark. The woman who once wore diamonds now clutched a cracked glass of wine. The woman who once hosted galas now stared at peeling paint on the wall. But what haunted her most wasn't the loss of wealth. It was the silence. No laughter, no footsteps, no power left to command. The silence screamed louder than any insult ever could. And yet in that silence, something twisted inside her. Because while most would have broken completely, Candace wasn't finished. Yes, she had been dethroned. Yes, Taylor now wore the crown. But Candace's heart still burned with rage. And in the hollow of her loneliness she made a vow, "If I can't have it back, I'll make sure no one enjoys it." The queen was gone. But in her place, something darker was being born. Do you think Candace deserves redemption? Or is her vow of revenge proof that she'll never change? Comment below, because what happens in the final chapter will decide everything, and if you haven't yet, hit subscribe, because the ending is not what you think. Candace had lost everything, but people like her never vanish quietly. Days turned into weeks, and while the world thought she was licking her wounds in exile, Candace was plotting. She had spent years learning how the machinery of power moved. She knew where the secrets were buried, Alexander's business deals, Taylor's hidden weaknesses, even the friends who only smiled when the cameras were on. Her enemies thought she was done. That was their mistake. She started small. Anonymous letters slipped into the right hands, a whispered word to a journalist here, a carefully timed rumor there. Each seed she planted was invisible at first, but slowly Taylor began to feel the tremors. Suppliers grew cautious. Invitations to events that once came with ease suddenly went silent. Behind her smile, Taylor could feel the walls tightening. She didn't know it yet, but Candace's ghost was already haunting her new life. And Candace? She sat in her dim apartment, watching it unfold, glass in hand, a bitter smile carving across her face. It wasn't wealth she wanted anymore. It wasn't status. It was satisfaction. To watch Taylor stumble, to watch Alexander doubt, to watch the empire she had lost burn slowly from the inside out. But fate has a way of twisting even the darkest plans. Because one night, when Taylor attended a gala alone, an event Candace herself used to dominate, she felt something unusual. The crowd that once adored her now kept their distance. Eyes whispered, and conversations shifted when she walked past. Something had changed. Something was coming for her, and somewhere in the shadows of that same ballroom, Candace was there. Her return wasn't announced, it wasn't grand, but her presence, it was enough to turn the room cold. Taylor's hand trembled as she reached for her glass because she knew this battle wasn't over. It was just beginning. The gala shimmered with chandeliers, music, and false laughter, but beneath it all, tension crawled through the air like smoke. Taylor stood in her silver gown, flawless on the outside, but her eyes betrayed her. They darted across the room, searching, because she had felt it. A presence. That feeling you get when someone is watching you, when someone who knows you too well is near. Then she saw her. Candace. She didn't walk in with noise or announcement, no flashing cameras, no gasp of the crowd. She simply stood by the edge of the hall, dressed in black, silent, but impossible to ignore. Every whispered rumor Taylor had dismissed suddenly came alive. Every sleepless night she brushed aside now pressed down on her chest. The world around her blurred, the music continued, but to Taylor it was distant, muffled, meaningless. Candace didn't move. She didn't need to. Her eyes did all the speaking, cold, unblinking, relentless. Taylor tried to hold her ground. She lifted her chin, forced a smile, and carried her glass across the room, pretending she owned it. But each step was heavier than the last. When she finally reached Candace, they stood face to face. For a moment, silence swallowed them both. Taylor whispered, voice trembling though she tried to mask it, "You don't belong here." Candace leaned in, lips curling into the faintest smirk. Her voice, low, controlled, cutting. "Neither do you." It was only 2 words, but they struck harder than any slap, deeper than any wound. Taylor froze. For the first time since taking Candace's place, she realized something terrifying. She wasn't as untouchable as she thought. The crowd around them went on with its glitter and chatter, unaware of the battle unfolding in whispers and stares. But for Taylor and Candace, the war had just shifted from the shadows into the open, and both women knew this was no longer about love, no longer about betrayal. This was survival. The chandelier above them glistened like a crown of a kingdom, but at the center of that kingdom stood 2 queens, one robbed of her throne, the other clinging desperately to it. Candace remained still, her gaze cutting through the layers of false smiles and designer gowns, never once blinking. Taylor tried to hold her composure, tried to convince herself she had won, but in the silence between them she felt it. Her victory had been fragile all along. The millionaire husband entered the hall at that moment, arm in arm with investors, politicians, and men whose words decided fortunes. His laughter filled the space, but when his eyes fell upon Candace, his steps faltered. He didn't expect her presence. He didn't invite her. Taylor noticed his pause. It terrified her, because for all her plotting, for all her charm, she knew a simple hesitation could unravel her control. She gripped his arm harder than before, pulling him back into the circle of conversation, forcing his attention away. But men like him were not easily controlled, not when a ghost from their past suddenly appeared in flesh and blood. Candace moved forward, not rushed, not timid, measured, deliberate, like every step was calculated. Her heels clicked against the marble floor, each sound echoing louder in Taylor's mind. The guests began to notice. Heads turned, whispers spread. No one knew who she was, not yet, but they could sense something in the air that shifted the mood of the gala. Taylor's smile cracked. She leaned closer to her husband, whispering through her clenched teeth, "She's nothing. Don't look at her." But his eyes betrayed him. He was already looking, already remembering, already questioning. Candace reached the edge of the circle where the wealthy men stood. She didn't wait for permission. She simply placed her hand on the table, steady, calm, and spoke. Her words were quiet, but in the stillness that followed, everyone heard them. "Do they know the truth?" The room tensed. Taylor's grip slipped. The millionaire's chest rose and fell, but he didn't answer. The men around the table shifted uneasily. They didn't know what truth she meant, but the weight of her tone made them wonder. Taylor stepped forward quickly, her laughter forced, her voice too sharp. "She's unwell. She shouldn't be here." But Candace didn't look at her. She only locked her eyes on him, and in that gaze, history spoke louder than any words. For the first time that evening, Taylor realized something dreadful. She was no longer controlling the story. Candace was rewriting it in front of everyone. The crowd leaned closer. The music no longer mattered. The night, the wealth, the status, all of it trembled on the edge of a truth only Candace held. And she wasn't finished yet. The air in the ballroom thickened. Every eye had shifted, not to the millionaire, not to Taylor, but to Candace, the woman who wasn't supposed to exist in their world anymore. Her hand remained on the edge of the table, fingers steady as if anchoring herself, yet her voice carried a calm weight that unsettled the room. "The truth," she repeated softly, but now her eyes swept across the circle of men. "Tell them, or I will." A silence fell so sharp that even the musicians faltered, their instruments freezing mid-note. Taylor moved quickly, stepping between her husband and Candace, her lips curling into something resembling a smile, but her voice cracked on the edges. "She's delusional. She's bitter. She'll say anything for attention." But the words didn't land. The investors exchanged glances, their curiosity now stoked. Men who usually drowned in champagne and ignored whispers of scandal leaned forward, their hunger for secrets outweighing their etiquette. The millionaire's jaw tightened. His hand clenched into a fist at his side. He wanted to silence Candace. He wanted to deny her, but deep inside he knew the danger wasn't her presence. The danger was her memory. Candace leaned closer, lowering her voice just enough that it forced the room into strained quiet, every ear desperate to catch her words. "Do they know," she asked, "where the money truly comes from?" A ripple of unease coursed through the group. Taylor's face drained of color. She reached out, grabbing Candace's arm, but Candace pulled free, her strength surprising even herself. The millionaire finally spoke, his voice low, warning, but not convincing. "Enough. This is neither the time nor the place." Candace's lips curved into a small, almost haunting smile. "Oh, it's exactly the place." The chandelier's light seemed colder now, as if the brilliance above only served to expose the shadows below. The guests shifted. Some took a step back, others leaned closer. The gala was no longer about wealth and celebration. It had transformed into a stage, and the play was just beginning. Taylor whispered again to her husband, urgent, trembling, "Do something, stop her." But he didn't move. He couldn't, because the very moment he tried to silence her, suspicion would harden into certainty. Candace knew this. She had him trapped, not with power, not with wealth, but with knowledge. And as she straightened her shoulders, as her voice rang louder, firmer, she declared, "Everyone in this room deserves to know the truth. About him, about her, about what was stolen." Gasps broke out. Murmurs filled the air. The gala had transformed into a courtroom, and she had just called the first witness. Taylor's hand trembled as she reached for a glass of champagne, raising it to her lips, but she couldn't drink. Her throat had closed. Candace's eyes never left her husband's. She was daring him to speak first, to admit, to confess, to fight. And in that silence, something fractured. He realized control had slipped from his grasp, because when a woman speaks with the weight of truth behind her, even a room full of power listens. And the more Taylor tried to mask her fear, the more her mask began to crumble. Candace wasn't bluffing. Everyone knew it. The only question was, how far would she go? If you were one of those guests, standing there in that golden ballroom, and a stranger suddenly hinted at secrets that could destroy the powerful couple hosting you, would you stay to listen or quietly slip away? Comment below. I want to hear what you would have done. The ballroom buzzed with whispers, tension thick enough to choke on. Candace had dropped the seed of doubt, and it spread like wildfire among the elite guests. But Taylor was not going to let her carefully built empire crumble in one night. Her heels clicked sharply against the marble as she stepped forward, sliding between her husband and Candace, her presence commanding, her eyes blazing with fury barely concealed under a painted smile. She raised her glass high, her voice suddenly loud, clear, and laced with laughter. "Oh, everyone, relax. You're witnessing nothing more than the theatrics of a jealous ex. A woman who lost her chance and wants to drag others down with her." Her laughter rang out, but it was brittle, cracking at the edges. The guests didn't laugh with her. Some shifted uncomfortably. Some narrowed their eyes. Taylor pressed on, louder now, forcing her confidence like a dagger. She was dismissed from this circle long ago, a thief, a liar, a woman desperate for attention. And look at her. She comes here uninvited, clinging to old wounds, trying to tarnish a celebration she doesn't belong to. Candace didn't flinch. She simply stood there, calm, her hands at her side, her eyes locked on Taylor's. The calmness was more dangerous than fury. It made Taylor's accusations look like frantic attempts to smother a fire with her bare hands. The guests murmured again. Their faces told the truth. Some believed Taylor, but many weren't convinced. Taylor saw it. Panic clawed at her, so she went further, her voice sharpened, her finger jabbing toward Candace like a spear. "Tell them, Candace. Tell them how you were caught stealing, how you begged for mercy, how you were nothing more than a stray woman wandering into places she didn't belong. You survived on scraps, on deception, and now you want to poison this night with your bitterness." The crowd gasped. A word echoed, stealing. That single accusation snapped through the room like a whip. Taylor smiled, thinking she had landed the blow. She believed she had turned the tide, but Candace finally spoke, her voice steady, unwavering, slicing through the air with precision. "Yes," she said, her eyes never leaving Taylor's. "They called me a thief. They threw me out for a bag of milk. But what they didn't tell you is who put it in my hands." The room fell silent. Every glass stopped midway to lips, every breath caught. Taylor froze, her confident mask cracking, her fingers tightening around her champagne flute until it trembled. Candace tilted her head, her voice low but sharp enough for every ear to catch. "Do you want me to tell them the whole story, Taylor? Do you want me to tell them why?" The millionaire shifted uneasily beside his wife, his jaw tightening, sweat forming at his brow. He knew this was no longer a battle of words. It was a trial, one fought under the bright lights of power and wealth, but decided by whispers and suspicion. And for the first time in years, Taylor was losing. The crowd looked at her, not at Candace, waiting, watching. Taylor opened her mouth to reply, but her voice caught. For the first time she had no script, no clever line, no mask thick enough to shield her. Candace had turned her greatest weapon, the accusation of theft, into a blade against her. The golden ballroom, once her throne, now felt like a courtroom, and she was the one on trial. The chandelier lights glittered like cold stars above the ballroom, but no one noticed their beauty anymore. All eyes were fixed on Candace and Taylor. The silence was unbearable, heavy, crushing, the kind of silence that comes before something breaks. Candace stood tall, still, her words hanging in the air like an unanswered riddle. "Do you want me to tell them why?" Taylor's lips parted. but nothing came out. Her silence was louder than any denial. The crowd shifted. A murmur began, low at first, then louder, voices rippling through the room. Wait, what does she mean? Taylor put the milk in her hands. Is that true? The whispers stabbed into Taylor's skin. She felt them like tiny cuts. Her smile faltered, and for the first time her mask slipped enough for the crowd to see the fear beneath. One guest, a woman draped in diamonds, leaned toward her husband. Do you remember? Taylor was the one who screamed the loudest when Candace was accused. Another man, adjusting his cufflinks, whispered. She was almost too eager to cast her out, almost like she wanted everyone to look at Candace instead of her. The murmurs grew bolder, heads tilted, eyes narrowed. Taylor heard it all, and it burned. She slammed her glass down on a nearby table, forcing a laugh, too loud, too forced. This is ridiculous. Lies. She's trying to twist history because she has nothing else, and you're all just... But her words drowned in the tide of suspicion rolling over the room. Candace didn't need to raise her voice. She just let the silence work for her. She let Taylor destroy herself with frantic laughter and half-formed words. The millionaire stepped forward, placing a hand on Taylor's arm, but she yanked it away. His eyes narrowed at her resistance. Something in his face shifted. Doubt. For years he had believed her. For years he had defended her. But now, with the crowd turning, with Candace's calm gaze cutting through the chaos, he felt that seed of doubt take root. The crowd sensed it too, and once doubt appears, it spreads. Suddenly, one of the older men, wealthy, respected, his voice carrying weight, spoke loudly enough for everyone to hear. Taylor, if you have nothing to hide, then let Candace finish her story. Or are you afraid of what she'll say? Gasps rippled through the ballroom. Eyes darted between the two women like they were watching a duel. Taylor froze. Her fingers twitched at her side. Her voice, when it finally came, was thin. She's lying. But the words lacked power. They were no longer weapons. They were whispers of desperation. Candace stepped closer, her shadow falling across Taylor's. Her voice was soft, but sharp enough to pierce every heart in the room. You called me a thief. You made me an outcast. But you know the truth. And now so does everyone else. The room erupted, not with applause, not with cheers, but with murmurs, accusations, questions. The crowd was no longer hers. The ballroom, once Taylor's stage, was now her cage. And Candace? Candace wasn't the outcast anymore. She was the one holding the truth and the power. If you were in that ballroom, listening to both women, whose side would you take at this point? Taylor's or Candace's? Be honest. The air in the ballroom had turned icy. Conversations that once buzzed with laughter and champagne bubbles now carried the weight of accusation and doubt. The millionaire stood there, still, heavy, his presence commanding the silence like a gavel striking wood. His gaze moved slowly from Candace to Taylor. Everyone waited for his voice. Finally, it came, low, controlled, yet carrying enough weight to silence every whisper. Taylor. Is it true? The words cut through the tension like a blade. Taylor's face drained of color. She blinked rapidly, her mouth opening and closing as if the words had been stolen from her throat. What do you mean? You can't believe her. She's bitter. She wants revenge. But the millionaire did not look away. His eyes locked on hers, steady and unblinking. I asked you a question. Did you put the milk in Candace's hands that day? The crowd leaned in. Even the chandeliers seemed to stop swaying. Taylor laughed, a brittle, hollow sound. Of course not. I would never. How could you even ask me that? But her hands betrayed her, trembling, clutching the edge of her gown. Her voice cracked at the edges, and the guests caught it like blood in the water. The millionaire stepped closer, his towering shadow falling over her. His tone hardened. Do not play games with me, Taylor. For years I trusted your words. For years I defended your story, but tonight I hear something else. I see something else, and I demand the truth." Taylor's eyes darted around the room, searching for an ally, for someone to speak in her defense. But no one moved. The same people who once cheered her now stood with folded arms, their faces unreadable, their silence condemning. Candace didn't need to say a word. She stood perfectly still, letting Taylor unravel in her own panic. Taylor's breath quickened. You don't understand. I had no choice. If I didn't, she would have—" Her words broke off. She had said too much. The guests gasped, their murmurs rising like a tide. The millionaire's voice thundered. "No choice? What do you mean by that? What exactly did you do, Taylor?" Tears welled in her eyes, but even they seemed rehearsed, forced. She tried to clutch his arm, but he pulled away, his face a mixture of anger and betrayal. "You stood by as she was disgraced. You let them call her a thief. You watched her life fall apart. And you said nothing. And now you tell me you had no choice?" The weight of his words crushed her. Her knees buckled slightly and she stumbled back, her carefully constructed image collapsing under the stares of dozens of eyes. The room was no longer hers. She was cornered, caged, exposed. The millionaire's final words echoed through the hall. "Answer me, Taylor. Did you put that milk in her hands, or not?" The silence that followed was unbearable. Every breath, every heartbeat in the room seemed to hang on her answer. And then, Taylor's lips trembled, and she whispered so faintly it was almost a confession. I never thought she'd actually take the blame." Gasps thundered through the hall like rolling drums. Candace's eyes burned into hers. The truth, long buried, had finally cracked its way to the surface. If you were the millionaire, standing there in front of Taylor after that faint confession, would you forgive her, or would you walk away forever? Drop your answer below. The confession hung in the air like smoke that could not be swept away. The crowd erupted, voices overlapping, whispers turning into accusations, gasps swelling into outrage. She admitted it. All these years, she let Candace suffer. Taylor staggered back, her face drained of all color. Her perfectly painted lips quivered, her gown suddenly heavy as chains. For years she had worn her beauty like armor, but now it offered no protection. The whispers clawed at her, stripping her down to the raw truth she had fought to bury. The millionaire's face hardened. For a long moment he said nothing. His silence was louder than any condemnation. He only stared at her, the woman he once trusted, now revealed as the architect of another's suffering. Taylor reached for him again, her voice cracking, desperate. "Please, you have to understand. I didn't mean for it to go this far. I thought it would all pass, that no one would remember." But the millionaire's voice cut her off like thunder. "No one would remember. Candace remembers. Every single day she carried that shame. Every single night she lived in the shadow of a lie you built. And you stood there, smiling, while she was cast out like dirt." The room was against her now. Faces turned away, eyes narrowed, lips curled with disgust. Guests she once ruled over now stepped back, as if she carried a disease. Taylor's knees buckled. She sank onto the polished floor, her tears finally breaking free in floods that streaked down her face. Please don't leave me. Please don't turn on me like this. I did it for us, for me, for—" Her words collapsed into sobs. But the millionaire's gaze did not soften. His voice, once filled with warmth for her, was cold as stone. "No, Taylor, you did it for yourself. And tonight, the truth has found you." Candace stood frozen, her heart pounding. For the first time, she saw her tormentor stripped of power, stripped of charm, stripped of every mask. This was not the untouchable Taylor who once humiliated her. This was a woman exposed, undone, brought to ruin by her own lies. The millionaire turned to Candace. His eyes softened as he reached into his pocket. Slowly, deliberately, he pulled out a folded envelope, worn with time. He held it out to her. This should have been yours years ago. Tonight, it returns to the rightful hands." Candace's fingers shook as she took it. Inside, she found documents, proof of inheritance, land, and wealth, everything Taylor had once stolen from her. The guests gasped again. The truth was now undeniable. The millionaire's voice rose once more, final and unshakable. "Candace is no thief. She is no beggar. She is the rightful heir to what was taken, and tonight her dignity is restored." Applause thundered through the ballroom. Some wept. Others bowed their heads in shame for believing the lie for so long. Taylor crumpled fully onto the floor, sobbing, her once glittering crown shattered beyond repair. No one reached for her. No one defended her. Her empire of deceit had burned to ash. Candace, tears streaming down her own face, lifted her head high. She had been humiliated, disgraced, cast out over a bag of milk. But tonight, justice had spoken. Her voice was quiet, but it carried through the hall. "You took everything from me, but you could not take my soul. That will never belong to you." The millionaire stepped to her side, standing firm like a guardian. The guests bowed their heads in respect. And in that moment, Candace was no longer the outcast. She was the victor. The past had come full circle. The thief was unmasked. The truth was restored. And the world would never look at Taylor the same way again. A bag of milk, something so small, unraveled a web of lies built over years. It destroyed a woman's false empire and restored another's dignity. But it leaves us with a question that haunts the soul. If you were in Candace's place, would you forgive Taylor for destroying your life, or would you walk away forever? Tell me in the comments below. And if this story gripped you, don't just watch in silence. Subscribe, so you never miss the next tale where truth hides in the shadows, waiting to be revealed. Because as tonight proved, one moment of truth can change everything.